Hello there, fellow Timeless Stories listeners and viewers. Are you ready for some serious entertainment? Because today we've got a video compilation that will have you on the edge of your seat. Get ready to cringe, laugh, and maybe learn a thing or two. We've scoured the internet to find the most uncomfortable discussions with HR, the craziest acts of cheapness, the wildest job interview moments, and the most embarrassing autopilot moments caught on camera. And if that wasn't enough, we've also got a story of someone who was dismissed as crazy, but was actually right all along. So grab some snacks, sit back, and let's dive into the madness. One more thing. Don't forget to like and subscribe. People who work in human resources, what's the most awkward or uncomfortable discussion you've ever had with an employee? Story 2. Not in HR, but was the head of engineering at a tech startup. Team of about 20 to 25 people total, half of them tech. One day, someone stops by another company sharing a floor with us and reports disturbing news that someone in our company has brought a weapon to the office. They say that they were in an elevator with a pair of our employees, and one of them, whom they describe as a young Asian male, told the other that he had a gun with him. Naturally, we're in a bind. On one hand, we don't want a crazy person to shoot anyone up, and kind of need to follow up on this. On the other hand, this sounds ridiculous given what we know about our employees. We basically had 2 or 3 people on the engineering team who could match this description, so we discreetly went and asked each one whether they own a gun and or brought one to work. Each denies it. We go back to the reporting party, and they insist that what they heard was very clear and threaten to call the police if we don't tell them what's up. We had a half hour before they executed this threat. The problem was resolved before the half hour was over, when this reached one of our sales guys. I don't remember how. We might have had to call an all-hands meeting. Turns out that he and an aforementioned young Asian male engineer were in an elevator earlier that day. The sales guy points to the engineer's arms and says, "Hey, how about them guns?" in reference to his musculature. Then there was some joking discussion about bringing it in and packing it or whatnot. Obviously, the other party in the elevator missed the gesture to the arms. Let's just say that nobody got work done for the rest of the day from being bent over with laughter at this situation. We once had a bomb threat in my office. The automatic soap dispenser fell off the wall and someone thought it was a bomb. Apparently, the battery pack on the inside of those has some exposed wires. Well, I'm glad everyone was safe. This other guy that was in the elevator, where was he working? What kind of work did they do? Was there a history of gun violence in the area where they worked? Was there a history of bombs going off where they worked? Story 5. Throwaway, as this is occurring at a multi-billion-dollar company and the executives involved are somewhat well known in the media. I worked at a tech company that was in the multi-year process of transferring engineering to an offshore contracting company. For this offshore company, the account was very large, so they had a VP director guy there to make sure things went smoothly. Either way, I would be out of a job, so I would very aggressively call him out on his nonsense publicly. The engineers nicknamed him Lex Luthor because I could defeat him in battle, but I could never unalive him. I say this because I only remember him as Lex Luthor. Lex Luthor was overly flirtatious with a female employee from QA. She was always visibly uncomfortable with it. One late night in the office, Lex Luthor assaulted that poor girl. The girl reported this horrible incident to HR. At this point, the details are not 100% clear. However, the girl was no longer working there after she reported the incident. The CEO made a decision to pay her off or intimidate her not to file a police report/sue. Not sure exactly what happened to her. The CEO did not want to ruin the relationship with the offshore company, so they had Lex Luthor work from home. The logic was that he could not spicily harass anyone over the phone or email. At this point, the executives thought they had this covered up. In the following days, there was a large 30-people engineering meeting. Lex Luthor was on the phone. An engineer presented an idea, and Lex Luthor fired back with a competing idea. One of the engineering directors snidely sided with Lex Luthor. Then, the engineer retorted with, "At least I didn't violate anybody." The room went silent, and the meeting ended right there. The cover-up was no longer covered up. The working relationship with Lex Luthor ended immediately. Shortly after, the chief people officer was so disgusted with the incident and the CEO's intervention on a clear HR issue that she left the company. The company continued with their offshoring efforts. Story 6. HR was involved, but not a worker. So I was 19 and working for a crummy call center for the summer to pay for uni. My team leader, T, was lovely, very kind and encouraging. About a month after I'd started, I was heading to my boyfriend's house, which was 40 miles away, and T just so happened to live near him. Great, lovely conversations, and nothing inappropriate. Then, things got weird. He started abusing his power over me to get my number and texted me really inappropriate things. His daughter was older than I am. I always tried to laugh it off and mention his wife and daughter. Anyway, one day I decided I didn't know what to do. So into HR I go with my phone. Big no-no. No one was allowed a personal phone. And as I'm sitting there, he starts texting me off his business and personal phone about what I'm wearing and what he wants to do to me. Both representatives looked so shocked. They could see I hadn't encouraged him and took photocopies of the texts. Next thing I know, he's being dragged in along with the CEO, and I have to say to him, it made me uncomfortable. He was given a slap on the wrist and told to go away. I was asked not to take it further. Funnily enough, all my bonuses became impossible. I couldn't do anything right, and it was obvious I was not wanted there, so I left. And he was arrested for violation 6 months later. Dang, props to you for reporting him. It's sad that she was pressured to leave, but it's good that she got out of there when she did. Was there any legal action she could take about being denied bonuses? Isn't that retaliation? After the scumbag got arrested, what happened to the CEO? Did his reputation diminish at least? Story 9. HR had one with me. Was crazy and awkward. We had mandatory yearly interviews. I come in, and they ask me all kinds of questions about whether or not I carry weapons. Am I active politically? Have I ever been in a fight? Who are my enemies? Etc., etc. Seemed odd, but I didn't do anything about it. Later, others are discussing their interviews, and they were asked about sports, music, families, etc. Turns out some moron reported me as potentially dangerous because I never attended off-work functions, kept to myself, and am fluent in German. Yes, that is a thing 70 years onward, apparently. I'm the most harmless guy I know. You have a higher chance of finding anthrax on frickin' Karen's church-baked sale cookies than you do finding so much as a thumbtack on me. I'd be the easiest guy for hostage negotiations to ever beat if I went nuts. They'd ask me what I want, I'd reply, "Frick it, I'm tired, you win." The South Park negotiator from the Veal episode could take me. That's an unfortunate situation. That sounds like something you should report to HR, but he had this discussion with HR. If this is the way they function, anyone could be reported for anything if you come up with enough excuses. Everyone's a suspect. It's straight up profiling. Story 12. I don't work in human resources, but I'm very close with my management team. We have an employee in an administrative position who drinks on the job. Habitually. Beer. She leaves her cans in the bushes. Everyone knows about it, and management had to step in. It's sad. Sadder is that her hygiene is lacking, to put it mildly. She smells bad. I heard all about the conversation. She cried because she was embarrassed. We have all tried to help, giving her clothing and bras and purses, advice and support. She doesn't want the help. I appreciate all the stress my bosses went through, though. I can't imagine telling someone they smell and have to clean up. How uncomfortable. And yes, there is help available to her through a work network for her alcoholism and anything else she needs. I'm more amazed that there was help available in some sort of program the company provides. I don't think many other positions would have that. How did she function at work? Was she like the people in the previous stories that could function well even though they were drunk? Story 15. When I worked as a supervisor at a retail store, there was one female employee who we kept on who was developmentally delayed in some ways. Not quite sure what it was, but we kept her on to keep her busy and stock shelves, greet customers, etc. Well, she had a terrible body odor problem that none of us leaders were sure how to address. Finally, One of the managers came up with the idea of purchasing her a gift basket full of care products, including soaps, shampoos, etc., and presented it to her as a gift from the leadership team. During the conversation, they dropped plenty of hints that she should use those products and similar products before she came into work each day, and there was never another issue with her body odor after that. The most reasonable execution and outcome in this whole thread. Tact is important. I have to say, I thought this was gonna go south. Maybe everyone's hints really got to her. I wonder how tactfully they approached it. It was good that everyone got on the same page. I'm really glad this was resolved. I guess it had to be an issue if she was customer-facing. But good to everyone involved for being civilized. Story 18. My mom works in HR for a semiconductor company and always had great stories about the people that she works with. One story that sticks out is she had an engineer that would always pick his nose and wipe it on something, which obviously made people uncomfortable. When she brought this up with him, he responded, "But I use my pen, so they don't know." He thought sticking a pen all the way up his nose was discreet. Bill, we're here right now to talk to you about your snot problem. People know. We all know, Bill. It's not my problem. Bill. So many hygiene stories, one right after the other. I'm amazed none of the employees were mocking the employee about their odors. All of them seem to go through HR. It's kind of a good thing, though. If the employees were making that one feel bad, then they would probably, even though it was true that they had an odor, would still complain to HR, and then that employee would be in trouble for not being sensitive. Story 22. I worked in HR. Coworker had to talk to a woman about pooping all over the bathroom every day. Apparently, it was a crime scene every single day because she hovered and was huge. I think she cried a lot about it and quit afterwards. I had to talk to a guy about body odor once. It wasn't that bad. He didn't know he had the stank on him and was glad someone told him. Went to the doctor and got some prescription for it that cleared it right up. He was a stinky mongrel, though. Reeked of straight-up armpit all day. What levels of cheapness have astonished you? Story 1. I went to a birthday party for my mother-in-law at a Filipino restaurant. Along with my wife and I, 4 of her friends were there. The friends ordered a mountain of food for the table. There were 7 of us there, but if there were a dozen, we couldn't have finished it all. This was a bit irritating right off the bat because while I was happy to pitch in for her birthday dinner, I didn't want to pay for 20% of a Godzilla feast from Westeros. It would end up being over $200 worth of food. So then the check comes, and I pitch in my credit card, and 3 out of the 4 friends turn into statues, except for the oldest gentleman who offers something like $15. I grab the bill and divide it up by 5, leaving out the dishes and drinks that my wife and I ordered for ourselves and tally it up, saying what everyone owes. Crickets. I remind everyone that they were the ones who ordered this giant mound of food in the first place, half of which was going to go to waste. To prevent awkwardness, my mother-in-law grabs the bill and runs off, leaving my credit card to go pay it. My wife prevents me from stopping her and causing a scene. I quietly lay into the 3 deadbeats at the table for letting an elderly woman on a fixed income pay a $200+ bill for her own birthday dinner. I lose it and call them total moochers, and whoa, suddenly there's that scene everyone was working so hard to prevent, with them screaming at me and me screaming back. The restaurant owners understandably intervene and toss us all out. I go back in and apologize and explain what happened. The restaurant, to their credit, knocked 40% off the bill out of nothing more than kindness. Salo Salo Grill in Las Vegas yell, and cancel the charge on my mother-in-law's card. And I picked up the rest, which was still quite a bit, but I felt a lot better about it. Hey, speaking of Las Vegas, and Salo Salo, I've eaten there before. Oh, if you've never eaten at a Salo Salo, I urge you to go. The food is absolutely amazing. I love it. The various meat platters they have are just amazing. I'm tasting it in my mouth right now as I'm describing it. It's just gorgeous. Treat yourself. Story 3. I worked for a short time as a luxury travel agent. and agents get tons and tons of free stuff all the time. Every day, there would be vendors setting up in the conference room for breakfast, lunch, and afternoon snacks, which we got for free. We just had to go listen to the vendor's pitch. This would totally go to some of the old school agents' heads. The agents in the office next to mine were notoriously cheap, especially the 60-something-year-old boss. They would push their way into the conference room, throw their business card at the general director of the poor vendors, and take as much food as possible. Multiple plates piled high. I'd pass their office and the food would be just sitting out on the desks uneaten. The boss was known for showing up at vendor-sponsored dinners and events with his wife, uninvited, and they'd bring plastic Ziploc bags and fill them with food from the buffet to take home. He made a ton of money, so it wasn't out of necessity. He was just insanely cheap and entitled. My favorite story about him was that our company used to go around the offices some Friday afternoons in the summer with an ice cream cart, and everyone would grab something. One each because we're freaking adults in a professional workplace. Not this guy. He filled a manila envelope with like 20 ice creams, labeled it property of name do not touch, and put it in the office freezer. My sassy coworker used to steal ice creams from the envelope all the time for our office just to spite him. Tasted so good. Maybe this guy was poor to begin with. He was used to doing this kind of stuff when he was scrimping and saving. I think those kind of habits die hard, even when you make a lot of money. I think it speaks to the mentality of how he operates with all of his money going forward. Maybe that's why he has all this money now. He didn't spend everything so frivolously. Story 6. Saw a guy take money from the tip jar to pay for a muffin like it was nothing. Poor cashier was in shock, I guess, because she didn't say anything. And this was from a cafeteria in an office building. Guy who did this was wearing an expensive suit. This would tick me off to no end when I worked at a coffee shop. The tip jar isn't a mandatory tip. It was exactly only for us when we went above and beyond for a customer and they wanted us to have extra. I had people go, "Oh, I'm short," and just rummage through the jar for $2. I had to stop them more than once and tell them it isn't a free goodies jar for you to buy that extra donut, you runt. Servers don't get paid enough as it is. The U.S. system is totally messed up in that they found a way to not pay people minimum wage. They force the customer to subsidize them. And somehow we've stuck with it for all these years. And for some reason, people have been trying to convince everybody this is how it's always been. No way. Fight for a living wage. Fight for a thriving wage. And don't take from the freaking tip jar. Story 9. My grandmother, as she didn't own a computer, had to mail in all her bill payments. One month, she didn't get her water bill, or it was delivered to someone else by accident. Whatever the cause, her next bill was for both that month and the previous month, and included a late fee that was less than the cost of a stamp. For the rest of her life, she skipped the bill 1 month and then paid both the next because she saved a few cents by just using 1 stamp instead of 2. This was a woman who had somewhere around $1 million in the bank when she passed. I wonder what other deals this person came up with. I mean, I don't disagree with the thinking process, but the profit margin on this is just far too small. Did she have any other deals like this where she thought bigger and was able to get a bigger refund back? I don't mind creative accounting. I don't mind creative legal accounting. But this is just nonsense. Story 12. I was a bartender at a country club. Employees are allowed to take home any food left over from weddings. After a wedding full of drunken jerkwads throwing things, grabbing waitresses, and other stuff, the mother of the bride marched into the kitchen demanding 2 things. That all the leftovers be given to her right now, and that the 18% tip added onto the bill for us should be removed. After explaining that she had already paid enough for this wedding and didn't want us getting anything else from her. This was after she had made sure that no tip jars would be out for us because they would take care of us later. Oh, they took care of them later, all right. That is just mean. I mean, you expect the bridezilla to be the focus of a story like this, but no. How much you want to bet that it wasn't even her paying for the wedding, that it was the husband? Story 18. My girlfriend invited me to her mother's birthday party, and tonight she revealed to me we would be dining on leftovers from her brother's rehearsal dinner a year ago. Maybe saving leftovers for work the next day? But a year later? What the hell? Job applicants who walked out of an interview before it was over? Why did you do it? Story 1. I never got as far as the interview. So much was wrong. I received a call asking me about my availability to attend an interview based on my posting on a professional website. I indicated that I was currently in the middle of a project but would be available to interview in 2 weeks. The woman on the phone yelled, "Then call me back when you're available." Click. She called me. She yelled at me. I wrote that company off. 2 days later, she called me again and asked to set up the interview. She said she would call me as soon as she had finished a meeting. You called me. Then you tell me you don't have time to finish the conversation that you initiated? Wrote her and her entire corporation off. Got a phone call 3 hours later. So-and-so, I want you to call her to schedule an interview on Monday. I definitely no longer want this job, but I do want to see if my predictions came true. I called on Monday. The person who answered the phone told me that it was the woman caller's day off. I am a genius. They call me and give me a runaround? What the hell? 2 weeks later. Yesterday, they called me again. Again, a person asks me to call at a later date to schedule an interview with a woman who couldn't bother to call me herself. I told them that based on their behavior in the past month on the phone, that I did not have any desire to work for their company. I broke my own code and fired off an email to the Director of Human Resources. This company is a luxury retirement community. There were golf courses, hospital clinics, 4 to 6 bedroom homes, clubhouses, townhomes, etc. It seemed like it might be a lovely place to work in my field. If they would treat me in such an unprofessional manner, how must they treat the residents of the community? There were 3 total callers involved. I can only imagine the motives for calling someone, asking for an interview, and then behaving in such a strange fashion. Nope. Do you think this one could be attributed to a clash between generations? Maybe boomers versus millennials? This person seems to think that everyone's just champing at the bit waiting for the next opportunity, while the person being called seems to have things well in hand. That's one of the best things about being a freelancer, having enough freedom and autonomy to say no. Story 3. I accidentally walked out on an interview. I had driven 4 hours to apply for a bar/gaming room job in preparation for moving cities for study. I had purchased an apartment, so I kinda had to take job searching seriously. I had spent about 20 minutes talking to the gaming manager, during which time the venue manager joined us, when some guy came up to them and started chatting to them. I sat there for maybe 5-10 minutes wondering if the interview was over, when I decided that most questions had been asked and my existence had barely been acknowledged since the guy had rocked up. I half interrupted, shook one of the interviewer's hands and said thanks, and exited the premises with no idea how the interview went. Was crossing the road to my car when one of the interviewers chased me across the road and offered me the position. Turns out the guy interrupting the interview was one of the owners of the venue. I sometimes wonder how I get through life considering how socially inept I can be. I'm fairly socially inept myself at times, but even I know that one wasn't your fault. They should have at least said, "Oh, this is so-and-so, the venue owner," to you briefly before getting into a 5 to 10 minute conversation with him. They screwed up, not you, which is probably why they still offered you the job. You probably didn't answer anything wrong. Or better, you answered well. When he interrupted, what he said was, "My time is valuable." When he shook hands, he said, "Thank you for taking the time to talk to me." When walking out, he said, "I have other offers." This dude basically came in, swung his peen around, laughed, and walked away. That venue manager had a tear in his eye, remembering when he was a cocky little jerk. Best part is he didn't even know he was doing it. Curse my life. Sometimes ignorance is bliss. Truly, this was the way to work it. And it really was their fault. If they're not going to acknowledge this person, how are they going to treat him when he's an employee with the company? I hope he was able to get into a good working situation after this. I hope they treated him better than they treated him in the interview. Story 5. I had just graduated art school with a design degree and was scraping by. unemployed and living 500 kilometers from my hometown for 6 months. I was getting desperate and antsy when I saw an ad for a multimedia designer on a job board. I called and set up a time for an interview. I didn't have a car, so I called a cab to take me to the address. I was still relatively new to the city, and the cab took me very, very far out, like a half-hour drive. Eventually, the cab pulled over in front of a bland suburban house. Something was off. Even the driver was suspicious. "Are you sure you want to get dropped off here?" he asked, sensing my nervousness. I was confused. I didn't really know where I was. This was the era before iPhones, not that I could have afforded one, and my awful flip phone was dying. Yeah, sure. Just wait for me. If you see me go in, you can leave." I walked up to the front door, which had a sign with an arrow instructing visitors to go around back. As I walked alongside the house, I turned back and noticed that my taxi driver, assuming I was fine, had driven away. When I found the back entrance, I was greeted by two middle-aged, balding white men in a basement rec room that had been converted into an office. "I'm here for the interview?" One of the men got up. Yes, that's fine. We just need you to fill out a questionnaire. It should take 30 minutes. I looked to my left. A poster hung on the wall. The portrait of a vaguely familiar bald white man surrounded by a glowing rainbow of swirling colors and energy beams. It was L. Ron Hubbard. "Sure," I said. "I just have to let the cab driver know he can leave." I promptly proceeded to walk out the door, pick a random direction, and walk for 45 minutes along the road until I found a bus stop. Story 6. It was a security guard job. I was way overqualified but needed to pay the bills. Sat down across from a dead-eyed young woman who worked in HR. She read interview questions from a computer screen in monotone, typing my answers up as we went. Was kind of ticked and snappy. I answered all the questions really well, but sometimes she didn't feel it filled the exact questions. I'm guessing that she was really unhelpful. Like she would ask, "Please describe a situation or day where you and your coworkers were given an unexpected assignment, difficulty or mistake in how to multitask to balance the new workload with current duties." I went into detail about how that was a daily experience at one of my positions. Nope, didn't cut it with her. She stared blankly and said that didn't answer the question. Then she repeats the long question word for word. Keep in mind, she was reading the question right from the screen, so I get she was probably following specific instructions. As much a red flag about the company as her. Still, she was so rude about the entire thing. You could tell she really didn't want to be there. After trying to answer one question 3 times, each time she repeated the question like I was mentally challenged. She wouldn't even explain what I was saying wrong. I just apologized, saying I changed my mind about the job and walked out without explanation. Got a much better paralegal job 2 weeks later. It doesn't sound that bad, but you didn't hear the totally unjustified contempt in her voice. So uncalled for. I tried to kill it with kindness, but it just didn't work. It sounds like this person was acting pretty much as the HR person. I think this person was just letting in who she personally thought would fit the job. I'd be willing to bet no one knows how far she's taking her responsibilities in this. I think she's just using her judgment, and I don't think it aligns with anyone else in the company. Story 9. I applied for a position as a manager of a restaurant. At the time, I was already a general manager at another restaurant, and I had years of management experience. They called me and asked to set up an interview, which I accepted. When I arrived 15 minutes early, I checked in and was told to take a seat, where I waited for 45 minutes past my scheduled interview time. When I was finally interviewed, the interviewer mumbled something about stupid jerkwad servers, then grunted to me about how upset he was that a server was refusing to pick up a night shift. Then he used a bunch of derogatory terms for women about that server. As the interview progressed, he would start side tangents about his staff and past managers. He then told me that while I applied to a manager's position, they actually didn't have one available and that I could serve tables until a position became available. I asked when that might be, and he said maybe 6 to 8 months. I read him the riot act in front of staff and customers about how much of my time he wasted and how he should never talk about his staff like that and about his professionalism. 8 months later, the restaurant closed. Well, at least this person was proven right. His instincts were right on. This interviewer just gave up all the tea about how everyone was treated just by rambling on that way. This man learned all he needed to know. This one's pretty much a no-brainer. All the facts were just laid out in front of him just from this guy complaining. Story 12. Just after I had been given 3 months' notice of layoff due to office closure from a job that I really liked, I took off early one day for an interview across town. When I arrived, I entered a waiting room full of people at least twice my age, in suits, resumes in hand. Upon seeing this sight, I realized I had very little chance at the position being offered, but since I was there, I may as well try. What I didn't expect is that we were all scheduled to interview together. We were all herded into a conference room where the group interview commenced. After a few rounds of questions, learning each other's qualifications, how we would handle various situations, and so on, we collectively learned that this position was part-time, not what had been advertised, and paid a mere $9 an hour. I walked out along with 3 other people. Only 3? I guess other people were desperate for work. It kind of sucks that they were willing to put themselves through some kind of torture. This job obviously isn't going to treat anybody well. They're already lying to the interviewees. Story 15. I recently went to an interview for a bank in my area. First, the woman I spoke to on the phone misrepresented herself. She told me she was the assistant branch manager. Upon arrival, she told me she was the head teller. The branch manager would be arriving shortly. I waited for an hour. After an hour of me double-checking the time and wondering if I'd gotten there late instead of early, I got up to leave. The head teller said she'd be there in 5 minutes, but at that point I just figured I obviously wasn't important enough. I left. I got a call back 3 days later apologizing and asking if they could set up another meeting at a bank I was nowhere near. I politely declined. Again, the way they treat you in the interview is probably the best you're ever going to be treated. And they didn't treat this person very well at all. Lying, making the person wait? It seems like they just want to see how much junk you're willing to put up with so that they can take advantage of it. Straight up sucks. Story 18. I went to a job interview while employed at my current company. A company that is safe, with great coworkers and a laid-back, fun environment. However, the salary was less than industry average and a long commute. So I applied at another place. As I'm in the interview, it's going great, but then the reality of leaving my current job hits like a ton of bricks. I start babbling questions I was using before, and then I realized I just wasn't ready to leave yet. I knew me leaving would hurt the company immensely, and that leaving would hurt people I know considered more friends than coworkers. So I told my interviewer, and he understood completely. He saved my record on file and ended the interview on a good note. Story 22. I walked out about halfway through because the dude was too busy on his phone. I thought maybe he was recording my responses on his phone. Then he laid the phone down on the table to write down some of what I was saying and noticed it was his Facebook open. I got up and walked out. I had a feeling he wasn't paying attention to anything I was saying. The dude was the head paramedic or whatever at the ambulance company I applied to. I just imagine people are unaliving in front of his face while he's using his Facebook. Who was crazy until they were right all along? Story 1. Hemingway. Before he took his life, he became extremely paranoid the FBI was following him. His wife and people around him just thought he was mentally ill and grew deeply concerned. Hemingway went as far as getting electrotherapy at a psychiatric hospital to try and help with the perceived delusions. Turns out, the FBI had been following and bugging him for years, according to declassified files. In comparison, there was a sci-fi writer, Philip K. Dick, who was convinced the FBI was monitoring him, so he kept sending demand letters that they release his file. His daughter was interviewed years after he passed, extras on Scanner Darkly DVD, if I remember correctly. I heard you've actually seen your father's FBI file, and it's quite large. Yes, it's rather large. But the only thing in there are copies of his demand letters. You mean you can just send spam to the FBI and they'll keep it? Fetch me the Dick file. Yeah, remember reading about the FBI bugging him. He had a tough life. He was in 2 plane crashes that left him in a lot of pain, and he also was injured in a fire and car crash. On top of that, he had a problem with excessive iron in his body, stolen from Wikipedia. Hemingway's behavior during his final years had been similar to that of his father before he unalived himself. His father may have had hereditary hemochromatosis, whereby the excessive accumulation of iron in tissues culminates in mental and physical deterioration. Medical records made available in 1991 confirmed that Hemingway had been diagnosed with hemochromatosis in early 1961. His sister Ursula and his brother Lester also unalived themselves. Other theories have arisen to explain Hemingway's decline in mental health, including that multiple concussions during his life may have caused him to develop chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, leading to his eventual self-unaliving. As the saying goes, it's not paranoia if they're really out to get you. There's a lot about Hemingway's life that is just amazing. There's a puppet comedian called Randy Feltface that did a great summarization of his life. It was very entertaining. I suggest you look it up. It's funny. Story 2. In 1912, the meteorologist Alfred Wegener described what he called continental drift, an idea that culminated 50 years later in the modern theory of plate tectonics. Wegener expanded his theory in his 1915 book, The Origin of Continents and Oceans. Starting from the idea, also expressed by his forerunners, that the present continents once formed a single landmass, later called Pangaea, Wegener suggested that these separated and drifted apart, likening them to icebergs of low-density granite floating on a sea of denser basalt. Supporting evidence for the idea came from the dovetailing outlines of South America's east coast and Africa's west coast, and from the matching of the rock formations along these edges. Confirmation of their previous contiguous nature also came from the fossil plants Glossopteris and Gangamopterus, and the therapsid or mammal-like reptile Lystrosaurus, all widely distributed over South America, Africa, Antarctica, India, and Australia. The evidence for such an erstwhile joining of these continents was patented to field geologists working in the southern hemisphere. The South African Alex de Toit put together a mass of such information in his 1937 publication Our Wandering Continents, and went further than Wegener in recognizing the strong links between the Gondwana fragments. Wegener's work was initially not widely accepted, in part due to a lack of detailed evidence. The Earth might have a solid crust and mantle and a liquid core, but there seemed to be no way that portions of the crust could move apart. Distinguished scientists such as Harold Jeffreys and Charles Schuchert were outspoken critics of continental drift. Oh, it's hard to grasp the full aspect of this story. I get it, though. I've heard about it. Basically, this guy just predicted that we were all one landmass millions of years ago before they just drifted apart. He predicted it. I wonder if he lived to be proven right in some point. It would have been tragic for him to pass while still having everyone believe his theories were bunk. Story 4. Michael Burry, the first guy to predict the 2008 housing market crash. He was a hedge fund manager for Scion Capital at the time, and basically bet his entire fund's liquidity, all the money the fund had, that there would be a crash. No one believed him except a few other people who also bet against the market. Several of his clients sued him for tying their money up in what they considered to be a foolish bet, all to have him be right in the end. He made his fund something like $1.3 billion, and the value increased about 489%. The movie The Big Short is about him and a few other people who were wise enough to bet against the market at the time. I've watched the movie like 5 times in order to try to understand exactly what happened, but still don't fully get it. I recommend it to anyone who's interested. Fun fact, Michael Burry was also ahead of the curve in the recent GameStop surge. I think he had something like 1.2 million shares of GameStop months before the price shot up. Might need to fact check myself. After watching The Big Short, I looked up how it all worked and what happened. Explaining it in the simplest terms, in the simplest way, trying not to mess up some of the details, this is how it worked. When you're given a loan, that loan is sold over and over again within the market. The loan is graded based on the likelihood of you fully paying the loan. Higher graded loans are worth more. The lowest grades are almost unsellable, or were, until they started putting them into larger package deals that included some extra higher-graded loans that were not sold yet. This created a demand, and the market was flooded with the lowest grade of loan. At the fear of losing business, low-grade loans started being given higher grades, and these awful loans, now being presented as higher-valued stuff, started being cycled through the market until they made it into the highest grading tier. This is what Michael Burry figured out. He checked loan by loan, seeing how the market actually was and bet against it. Story 6. My wife, who never liked my mom's husband. He apparently made a pass at her before we were married, and I just wrote it off as Bob being Bob, because it was honestly semi-innocent, and at the time, he and my mom were newlyweds. But over the years, we started finding out he was hitting my mother. He fondled my sister and was constantly cheating on my mom. He got caught trying to take an upskirt picture of my friend's underage sister, and he punched my mom in the head outside in the ice, causing her to hit her head on the pavement, fracturing her skull, and causing an almost fatal brain hemorrhage. She needed 2 brain surgeries and now deals with balance issues and almost complete loss of taste and smell and hearing in one ear. He has never faced any consequences for anything because, for reasons we can't quite understand, local law enforcement in their podunk town takes his side every time she calls the cops on him. One time, they even took her to jail because his drunk butt fell in the walk-in pantry while they were having an argument, and he called the cops and said she beat him up. He's literally twice her size. Edit. Some questions I've had to answer a few times. He has moved out and they are getting a divorce. I haven't kicked his butt because I live 1,000 miles away. I don't know where he lives and am the sole breadwinner for my wife and 2 daughters. If they go to jail, they become homeless. My mom doesn't want him in jail yet because he pays the bills, and if he stops working, she loses her much-needed health insurance and her home. The divorce trial is just around the corner, and my sister and her friend's sister have agreed to testify against him. So we're going to see how that goes. It's so painful when our relatives get trapped in things that we can't fix right away. It's too bad no one can take her in. I think after the divorce, it would be prudent to file some lawsuits against the police in that county. Just truly tragic what they did. Story 9. Courtney Love was warning everyone about Harvey Weinstein back in the mid-90s, but everyone just wrote her off. If you're a woman in this industry and Weinstein invites you to one of his parties, don't go. If Courtney Love, of all people, tells you not to go to a party, you should really not go to that party. I fully believe that most of the rumors and bad press about Courtney Love come from Hollywood attempting to silence her. Don't get me wrong. Don't think she's a saint, but she's been very vocal on social media about her experiences over the last few years. And I always wonder if we would have known about the Hollywood abuse sooner if she had been given a platform earlier. In the light of all the recent culture that's happened and all the other scandals coming to light, this does make her story a bit tragic. Sure, maybe she wasn't perfect, but she was right about all of this. I think the repercussions of this are going to be far felt. I don't think we're out of it yet. It's definitely never going to be the same again. Story 12. Ludwig Boltzmann. His equations and formulas explain the physical properties of matter, but as it went against the then accepted laws of physics, he was ridiculed and ignored for years while fighting for atom theory to be accepted. He took his own life just 3 years before Ernest Rutherford discovered the nucleus of an atom, proving Boltzmann's theory. If experiments didn't show that they work, the derivatives in StatMech would seem like utter hogwash. At the graduate level, it was less intuitive to me than quantum. I can really see why it was hard to accept and possibly drove its creators mad. Ludwig Boltzmann, who spent much of his life studying statistical mechanics, perished in 1906 by his own hand. Paul Ehrenfest, carrying on the work, perished similarly in 1933. Now, it is our turn to study statistical mechanics. David L. Goodstein, States of Matter. I've heard this intro before. Kind of morbid, but kind of funny. I can't believe all these scientists are just so unaccepting of new theories that could change and enlighten our way of thinking. Again, science is supposed to be about finding the real evidence, to adjust our way of thinking to find the truth. Why is everyone so against it? Story 15. This one was beyond messed up. Your child is taken from you and unalived by wild animals. Then you're jailed for unaliving your own child and ridiculed the world over for your lame story as to what actually happened. Then, yeah, being right the whole time. Not even being right, telling the truth the whole time. God, that poor woman. I can't even fathom what she must have gone through. Losing her child and then being punished and ridiculed for it? And then being paid off as though it was all fine now? Absolutely horrible. I gotta admit, I'd never heard of this story. I don't know if it was recent or if it was from, a long time ago. Who was this? And how much did they try to pay her off for? And what did she want? Did she file any lawsuits? Story 20. In the 2012 presidential debates between Mitt Romney and Barack Obama, both were asked what the greatest foreign threats to America were. Mitt Romney said Russia, and became the butt of jokes on both sides of the aisle for it. Didn't he know the Cold War was over? Anyway, there's plenty about the guy I don't like, but I think about that answer a surprising amount as politics unfurls now. I almost feel like I'd have to apologize if I ever met him for how stupid and everyone else found that at the time. Story 25. The fan that predicted the show's How I Met Your Mother message was shamed, only to be completely right in the end. What's something weird, funny, or embarrassing you've done on autopilot? Story 3. I lived in the same house for 16 years. Moved out. Years later, I did some summer work as a construction worker on my old house. First day I walked in, mindlessly did what I always did when I came in. Waltzed into the kitchen during the family's breakfast, opened the fridge, and peered inside for a long while looking for something to eat. I came to myself, dude, I don't live here anymore. Looked up, and the family was all staring at me from the breakfast table, forks in midair, at this unknown construction worker making himself right at home. I was so embarrassed I backed out, stammering the whole time and trying to have them understand, I'm so sorry, I used to live here. Wasn't allowed inside work at that job site for a while. That's kind of painful considering that he lived there. The place held a lot of memories for him. I think it was even more telling that the refrigerator was in the exact same spot. If he was really on autopilot and opened the fridge door, does that mean the fridge was the exact same fridge? And he was at work. Why was he expecting to eat? Story 6. I had a deadline and I was very sleep deprived. I drank a lot of coffee, so I had to visit the loo a lot. One particular pee visit late at night, I went to wash my hands as usual, but the tap wouldn't budge. I kept turning it, yet no water would come out. So I did what most adults would do when that happens. I started crying and called for someone to check it, saying that I broke the tap in between gasps. Boyfriend walked to the sink and magically fixed the tap. I was turning it the wrong way. They started crying? Was it like jokingly crying or whining, actual crying? Maybe they were just cranky because they didn't get any sleep. And were they working at home when they were supposed to be working at the office? Little confusing. Need some clarification here. Story 9. I was feeling an encroaching sickness coming upon me one time, so I decided to be proactive and make myself a couple days' worth of the most baller chicken soup I could manage in advance, so I'd be able to eat well even when I was dying of the allergy. I chopped the carrots, I sorted the onions, I stewed the chicken bones, and I cooked that mother sucker down for 8 hours in the most delicious stock you could imagine. Then I poured it all through a colander into the sink. Was it stopped up? Maybe it could salvage it. Or did it all just go straight down the drain? I think if you did that, that's probably a sign that you are about to get sick. That's so bad that he just wasn't able to enjoy all the effort he put into this. It sounds like he was doing a lot to make the baddest chicken soup he could. Story 12. I used to work in a factory starting at 6 a.m., so I'd have to get out of bed around 5:15 each morning. There was one morning when I got up, had my breakfast, and left as usual, drove round the corner to the garage where I would buy my lunch. It seemed a lot quieter than usual, but being half asleep myself, it only half registered. Then I got back in my car and noticed the time. I was awake 3 hours early. Curse my life. I went home and went back to bed for a couple hours. Well, at least he got a little extra sleep, and at least he knows he can get up and be ready for work at the right time. Did he leave alone? If he did no one remind him or tell him what the time was, or were they just having a laugh? I could believe it if they were just letting him go on autopilot so they could laugh at him. Story 15. I've been working with children for 7 years now. When I'm drunk, tired, or otherwise distracted, I go into teacher mode. If I'm traveling with people, I count them on and off public transport. I offer everyone water and snacks if I have them, and even tell complete strangers to use your walking feet and inside voice if they're running or shouting. I didn't even know I was doing it till my boyfriend pointed it out to me. How often does this happen? And you're doing this to total strangers? Has anyone ever fired back at this person? Is it so close to her being on autopilot that if someone did bark back at her, she tried to put him in a timeout? Story 18. I was working the back line at an Arby's way back in the day. We used to get our sub buns foot long, but all the subs we sold were 6-inch. I literally reached into the bag, grabbed a sub roll, cut it in half, and then put the knife back in the bag and tried to cut another sandwich with the sub bun. My manager saw it and perished. I would have liked to have seen that too. At least the knife was put away and he wasn't trying to do something dangerous with the knife. It must have been very amusing to see. I wonder what he did when he realized that this bread knife of his wasn't doing him any good. Story 24. Was signing for a parcel on one of those electronic things delivery drivers use, and I wasn't paying attention and ended up staring at it for a minute and then just drawing a straight line on the screen and handing it back. He was confused. Story 30. The pipe underneath my sink was broken, so I put a bucket below it to catch the water leaking out. When it was full, I poured it back in the sink and proceeded to flood my kitchen. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.